In this video, I'm going to cover a really important topic, a topic that can bring you great positive change and relief. And it's amazing that there's information out there like this, that the theory of it, the concept of it, that the information itself allows for such wonderful positive changes in our lives. That has been my experience from learning this information from various sources and teachers, and from applying it to my life, and from sharing it with others too. And as a life coach and as a facilitator, seeing them have those excellent, wonderful changes in their life where they begin to interpret themselves and their life and their past and their future differently. And they literally become a new person with more positive relationships, harmonious relationships, more joy, more love, more self-acceptance, more surrender, more flow. And the information that we're going to share today is that just because you feel something doesn't mean it's true. And in life, we're taught to follow our feelings, to trust our gut, so to speak. And so many times when, for example, when we're in a misunderstanding with someone, in conflict, or in an emotional situation, we might follow our gut or follow what we feel, only to sort of make the situation more volatile, less peaceful, less clear. When, for example, we react at someone and raise our voice and yell or say those words that we wish we hadn't said. And it's quite confusing because people say, do what you feel. And of course it's confusing because, hey, it's natural to assume that if we feel something, we should probably go with it. And so how do we make these choices in those scenarios where we feel like we really need to do something or should do something or want to do something, and yet maybe some other part of us understands or has the precognition that, hey, that's probably not a useful thing to do? How do we reconcile that? And how often does it happen, even in small circumstances, like if we're going to get chicken or fish at the restaurant, or in much more important circumstances, like in a job interview or in an important discussion with someone that we're close to? How often does that happen? So how important is it to understand how to navigate those situations? And if we assume that just because we feel something, it's true, and that's just who we are, and that we should just follow what we feel blindly, well, then we might end up living a very reactive life. A life that's not necessarily guided off of conscious wisdom and discernment. A life that's more emotional, and where the decisions that we make are based on our emotions. And so the results that we get are likely going to be emotional. And so to understand whether it's useful to just do what we feel, we must ask, well, what is it that we feel, and where is that coming from? Is it coming from truth, or is it coming from something else? And when you really closely examine it, and you can do this, you can meditate upon this and come to this realization. And I encourage you to do so, to explore this in a process of introspection and meditation, analytical meditation. Or maybe you can just resonate with it now as we talk as true. Maybe these words ring true to you. And the way we feel in the present moment is not necessarily based on truth. And it's more accurate to say that the way we feel in the present moment, that our feelings are based on the past. And not only the past, but really our interpretations of past experiences. You see, all of those interpretations of past experiences get stored consciously and subconsciously. even unconsciously, in our minds and in our emotional systems too. Meaning that every interpretation we make usually has some form of emotion attached to it, especially when it's a painful interpretation of an experience. Now, as I'm saying that, an interpretation of an experience, maybe some lights are going off about an opportunity for deeper understanding there. How often do we assume that our interpretations of experiences are equal to the actual experience? How often do we assume that we 100% accurately interpret an experience and then store that interpretation in our system as if it's true? And yet there's 7 billion people on the planet and everyone has their own opinion. So which one is true? A lot of the times our feelings come from a process of processing new information through the lens of our interpretations of past experiences. I'll say that one more time. The way we feel comes from a conscious and subconscious and unconscious process of interpreting new information through the lens of our interpretations of past experiences and their associated emotions. You can understand this. You're a genius. People are very intelligent. It's our judgments of self, it's our fears that prevent us from accessing that cognitive power. But it's in your brain. You have it. And if you really consider it, if you really consider who you are, it's likely a set of identities and roles and beliefs. Like maybe you're a business person, or maybe you're an artist. You're a girl or a boy or a woman or a man. Maybe you're a father or a mother. Well, all of these are just pieces of information. All of these are interpretations of your social status and of identity. And those are not who you really are. You're a soul that is undefinable by a word or a sentence or a role. You're far greater than just a business person or a student or an artist or a mother. And if you consider all your past and future lifetimes, how many different roles are you going to play in those? And those roles, they need not define you. And oftentimes, we feel according to the role that we're identified with. So for example, how might a father feel when they find out that their son isn't doing well in school? Might they feel angry? Might they feel the need to help their child and to communicate the importance of doing well in school to their child? How does a partner, a husband, feel when they feel like their wife is not communicating with them optimally? Might they feel betrayed? Are these emotional reactions, are they real? Or are they scripted? Is it possible for us to not feel angry in situations where our roles say that we should feel angry? Is it possible to not feel betrayed in situations where our roles say we should feel betrayed? I would recommend that and suggest that, like actors in a movie or a play, we reenact the emotional reactions of prior generations, and that script is stored in the object called a role or an identity. And so instead of actually processing an experience from a conscious vantage point that is free from beliefs, projections, roles, we process experiences through the lens of social norms, expectations, identity, and role playing. And that is all a process of ego, which is a process of separation and not a process of truly connecting and understanding to the present moment and what's going on. And so, the way we feel is often actually coming from our lower three energy centers, the first, second, and third, which are made for self-defense, survival, and managing stress, and usually not coming from the heart, the throat, the intuition, center of intuition, and our crown chakra, which is connection to the divine. And if we want to connect to our highest potential in our lives, it's very important that we begin to become self-aware of our tendency to react emotionally and from stress and from fear to life circumstances, so that we can begin to respond consciously to life circumstances. And as you begin to respond consciously from life circumstances to life circumstances, it's going to involve a process of no longer reacting just based on how you feel. So when someone cuts you off in traffic and you want to yell at them and give them the finger, it might be more conscious not to do that. It might lead to better results. And every single one of these decisions or choices you make are so important and have ripple effects. When you move a grain of sand on the beach, you've changed the future of the whole world with just moving a grain of sand. And the same applies to your life. When you make one different choice, it has ripple effects across all of your lifetimes. And who knows, if you had given that person that cut you off with a finger, maybe they would get out of their car with a baseball bat and hit your windshield, and someone you love who's in the passenger seat might get a fragment of glass in their eye, and then they might go blind. And these things, while we pray that none of them ever happen, this example, it illustrates how every little thing we say and do can have a consequence, whether small or an implication, let's say, instead of a consequence, which is such a scary word. An implication which is small or large. And by the way, if something, when things happen, it's really not useful or accurate to perceive them through the lens of good and bad. Those black and white lenses, dualistic lenses, because who knows, maybe that experience of getting the fragment in the eye and your loved one losing their vision in one eye, if they lose their vision in one eye, maybe they don't. Maybe just that one event leads to you becoming closer and having a far more fulfilling relationship that leads to a lot more learning and evolution than you would have ever achieved in this lifetime. And oftentimes seemingly painful and terrible events in our lives are some of the most evolution producing. They lead to the most growth and the most positive things, like the lotus flower growing from the muck. And so judging any situation as bad, I would suggest is in a way ignorant. It's not seeing the lotus that has the potential to be born. And if we continue to see a situation as bad, then in a way we present that, we can prevent that lotus from being born from that muck, because we stay stuck in a state of victimhood as opposed to receiving the learning that every single situation we experience can offer us, the evolution that it can offer us. And with that evolution comes greater enlightenment, greater understanding, greater love, greater harmony, greater resonance with the divine. And if we align ourselves in that way, if we choose to align ourselves in that way. So back to how we feel it. Just because we feel it doesn't mean it's true. It really doesn't. How many times have you felt something was a really good idea and it turned out, and you did it, it turned out it wasn't? Like, hey, I think it's a really good idea. I feel like it's a really good idea to punch a hole in the wall right now. And bam, you break your hand. Or I feel like it's a really good idea to criticize my partner and leave the relationship, and next thing you know, it's them that's kicking you out. I'm sorry, it's not funny. And there's an opportunity to be lighthearted about these items, because this whole process is actually a very compassionate process. This process that we're in, the process of God, the process of the divine. And this process of learning and evolution that we're participating in here is one that's useful to to appreciate and to enjoy as much as possible. So in addition to the things we feel not necessarily being true, I would add that the things that we think are not necessarily true. So how many times have you thought, oh, I really want to say this, or this is a really good idea, and it turned out, whoa, that was probably not optimal. Now, can you imagine when we think something is true? When we think it and we feel it, what an effect that can have in our systems. How much more challenging might it be to make a different choice, a conscious choice, when we're thinking and feeling something completely different? So if we're thinking and feeling, I gotta get out of this relationship, for example, or I gotta quit this business, or I gotta change my job, or I gotta move locations, or I gotta say this. If we're thinking and feeling that, how much discipline or awareness or focus is required to make a conscious choice that is different than what we think and feel in that moment? Quite a bit, and you can do it. What are the implications of making that different choice in that moment, of making a conscious choice based on your wisdom, based on your discernment, based on your assessment of your quality of consciousness in that moment? Maybe you're able to realize that, hey, I'm really triggered right now, and the thoughts that I'm having and the emotions that I'm having, I probably shouldn't use them to make choices, to make decisions. Therefore, I'm going to apply the most wisdom I have and choose to either say something different, do something different, or even not do or say anything at all for right now. Sometimes that's the most optimal thing to do, is to wait for the storm to pass, because it will pass, as all things are temporary. Like the statement, this too shall pass. What a beautiful statement that is. This too shall pass. And if you connect to a time where you were really angry and felt like doing something really reactive, imagine understanding at that moment that, hey, this too shall pass. And when it passes, what is left? And when it passes, is there more room for quality understanding, quality decision making? Usually. Because what we feel isn't always true or accurate. And what we think isn't always true or accurate. In fact, maybe the best way to evaluate a scenario and an opportunity is to do so from a very empty, blank slate. I mean, think about this. When you go scribble on a piece of paper some pros and cons in order to make a choice, you start on a blank piece of paper. You start from scratch. Now, there's a profound realization here, and it's that most of the times we're using our thoughts and our emotions to make decisions. We're actually using our past selves, meaning everyone and every way that we have been up until that very moment. If you make a decision now based on how you feel and how you think, you're making that decision based on who you've been. If you make a new decision, a decision that's not based on how you think and feel, a decision that's a choice that's different than what you currently think and feel, then you're making a choice based on who you want to become. Therefore, if we want change, it's almost a requirement that we go outside of the way we think and the way we feel currently. Because choices made from the way we think and feel currently are choices based upon who we've been up until this very moment. And if we continue to make choices, if we continue to say things and do things based on who we've been, then we're not changing. In fact, the only way to change is to make decisions and choices based on completely new information, based on completely new thoughts and new emotions. If we don't do that, then we're just repeating the past. If we're following our gut, then we're just following the programs that have created our ego, our personality, and our identity to this point. And that program is going to lead to the same results over and over. In fact, in order for us to change it, it is a requirement for us to accept new information that falls outside of the scope of our existing belief system and comfort zone. So if you're receiving information in life that is different than what you believed up until this point, and that is outside your comfort zone, and you have faith and perceive that information is coming from love and wisdom and wanting the best, then that information is likely to be an incredibly facilitative thing. And if it wasn't different than what you previously believed, and if it didn't make you somewhat uncomfortable, then it likely wouldn't be very different. And if it wasn't very different than who you've been and what you've believed in, then it wouldn't lead to change. And so the process of learning requires stepping out of who we've been and stepping into someone new. It requires accepting information, ideas, and emotions that are outside of the norm. Not only of our own personal norms, not only of our own personal comfort zone, also the norms of society. Because if you're making decisions based on what's going to lead to everybody liking me and accepting me and me being part of the herd and the tribe, and the tribe is caught in a program, if society is merely typically operating based off of traditions, then society is not changing very quickly. And the influence of society is constantly influencing how we interpret information and the choices and decisions we make. Meaning that a lot of the choices we make involve a subconscious process of asking, how will this affect my perceived social status? How will this affect how other people think of me? How will this affect how my family views me and thinks of me? And we often prioritize, without realizing it many times, we prioritize how other people will view us over our own process of conscious wisdom and discernment and who we want to become. And therefore we will remain in painful, uncomfortable situations or states of mind in order to remain in rapport with family and society, instead of stepping out of our comfort zone, accepting that we might not be completely accepted by others, and becoming someone new who is actually more loving and empowered. And how many people feel that comfortable with someone that they are in relationship with changing really fast? Ironically, many of our relationships are not that supportive of any type of change, including positive change. And so you might bring these great new concepts into some of your relationships and they'll be like, I don't think so. You might be really excited about changes you're making in your life and you share that with others and you don't really receive the positive response that you were hoping for or expecting. And that's why the process of change is in a way such a personal thing. And if you do find people that you can share that with and who are supportive, that is wonderful, and we wish that for you. So, how does one evaluate how does one make a conscious choice? I would suggest that after realizing that just because you feel it doesn't mean it's true, and just because you think it doesn't mean it's true, there's actually quite a simple process of first intentionally taking your time to respond and noticing anytime you feel negative emotion and not reacting from those negative emotions. That you can do. You can feel when you're triggered in a negative emotion, any negative emotion, and realize immediately that, well, hey, if I'm feeling a negative emotion, anger, stress, frustration, then my quality of consciousness is likely reduced in this moment. As soon as you notice that, you can choose not to react based on the way that you feel or the way that you're thinking in that moment. And once you've done that, you've already succeeded. You've already proactively prevented things from sort of escalating and getting worse. So then the question is, okay, so what are you saying? Do nothing? Well, sometimes doing nothing is pretty good. Much better than throwing a vase or punching the wall or taking all your money and running or spending it all or sending that nasty text. After you recognize that you're in a program, it can be useful to resonate with a greater truth. And we would say one of the greatest truths there is that is useful in those times is to understand completely that everything is okay. And to see yourself as this being that is eternal, a soul. And that all of this that we have here is just part of our soul's learning process, and that we are being loved in every moment, and that everything is okay. And that there have been many very enlightened individuals, very intelligent individuals who, when you hear them speak, it's like you know it's true because of the intelligence, because of the consistency of their message, because of the way in which they communicate it. And then what they say is that on the other side, once we pass, there's times where there's so much peace and love, where we can see that all of this is just one big process, that we're being loved and supported the whole time, and that pain creates the illusion of bad things and death and fear, and that even pain and death we can transcend. We can come to not see those as negative, terrible things. We can come to not see loss as such a terrible thing, or any negative event, and we can begin to embrace a quality of consciousness that embodies equanimity, seeing all things as equal, a process of consistent inner peace, where we can remain in our hearts and present, and at inner peace, regardless of what's going on around us, regardless of the decisions of others. And that is a state of self-sovereignty, of self-empowerment. So in those situations, we can remember this information. And you see how this information creates the foundation for the experience. And without this information, it would be hard to really commit to this change. So if in those moments, once you have this information, you are able to realize that you're in a process of emotional reaction. Remember that the decisions you make, the reactions you take from those states of consciousness, if we would even call them that, we might call them states of unconsciousness. So from those programs, from those negative emotions, that those reactions typically do not serve you in your life. They don't serve your highest and best good. Then you can choose to relax and wait. And then the next step is to ask yourself, what choice in this moment would be in my highest and best good, and in the highest and best good of the situation and the people around me? Not from a vantage point of life and death and self-protection and fear that we get into when we're triggered. That said, from a vantage point of compassionate understanding of self and others, of seeing the inner child in whatever person we might be in conflict with, of seeing our own inner child, of seeing their tendency to react, of seeing our tendency to react, of knowing that just because we think and feel it doesn't mean it's true. And therefore, just because they're thinking and feeling that about us doesn't mean it's true either. It's just a program. It's not how they really feel. Seeing it as temporary. Once we see all of those things, understand those things in the moment, we're able to forgive. We're able to say, okay, well, they just said this really nasty thing about me or to me. And it's the type of thing that I would react to with lots of anger, and I would say something equally or more hurtful in response to that, or in reaction to that. This time, I'm going to respond. I'm going to respond with love. Because I know that they didn't really mean it. I know that they're afraid right now. I know that they're trying to protect themselves right now. And so I'm going to respond consciously. Or I know I'm trying to protect myself right now. That's the way I feel, and I'm about to say something to do that. And instead, I'm going to tell myself everything is okay. I'm going to see that higher perspective, that bigger picture perspective of being a soul on this planet. And what does my soul want me to do in this situation? Do they want me to yell and fight? Or do they want me to understand and accept and love and forgive? And I'll tell you what, life is like a ping pong game. When you hit that ping pong ball back differently, when you make that different choice, it changes the whole game. The person has to move, they're going to respond differently. And you might not see it immediately. It might not be evident immediately. They might stay angry at you. That doesn't mean that choice, moving that grain of sand, isn't having a profound influence on the rest of your life and all of your lifetimes. And you might find that when you begin to behave intentionally this way, to focus on life through this vantage point, that you start to learn some incredible things about life. So it's just, and that process of learning and evolution becomes more interesting than anything. More interesting and fulfilling. And then our focus can get off of food and distractions and lower vibrational experiences, and we can raise our vibration. And remember, by raising our own vibration, by focusing on raising our own vibration, we raise the vibration of the planet. So your evolution evolves humanity. And so it's vitally important and good and beneficial. We hope that you found this helpful.